Very well. Absolute legends. Imagine this. Your country just survived the Great Depression, and your biggest national threat isn't another army or famine or disease. It's birds. And not even cool, majestic eagles, just tall, angry emus that can't fly, but somehow can dodge bullets. Like the video, subscribe to Ancient Absurdity and prepare for history's dumbest war, because Australia actually lost to a bunch of birds. Boom. It's 1932. You're an Australian soldier with a Lewis gun and a bruised ego. Your enemy? Feathery chaos on two legs. You wake up to the sound of destruction that doesn't belong to tanks, bombs, or invading armies, but to a horde of giant birds that look like they escaped from a prehistoric nightmare. It's 1932, and Australia's vast farmlands, already battered by drought, debt, and despair after the Great Depression, are under siege by emus. Not eagles, not hawks, not anything noble. Just 6-foot-tall, flightless chaos with feathers. They move in waves, tens of thousands of them, charging across the Western Australian plains like a slow-motion stampede of very confused velociraptors. Each one eats crops like a starving tourist at an all-you-can-eat buffet, and they don't stop. They trample fences, destroy wheat fields, and leave behind trails of devastation that make the farmers wonder if evolution itself is trolling them. To understand how bad it got, picture this. You've spent months planting wheat that the government promised to buy, only to watch it vanish under a feathered apocalypse. Every stalk flattened, every fence torn down. Your farm looks less like an agricultural enterprise and more like a feathery crime scene. And while the farmers reach for their shotguns, the emus just laugh. Well, they don't actually laugh, but they make a sound somewhere between a drum beat and a death rattle that feels like mockery. Word spreads fast. Newspapers describe a plague of emus. Scientists estimate over 20,000 of the creatures marching inland. One desperate journalist calls them avian anarchists. The government, ecological, debates whether this is a wildlife problem or an act of war. And because this is 1930s bureaucracy, someone inevitably says, well, we do have soldiers doing nothing. Enter the farmer's plea. Send the army. It sounds like a joke, but it isn't. Australia's Minister of Defence, Sir George Pearce, a man who once served in World War I, actually approves the plan. The army, armed with Lewis machine guns, will go to war against birds. Imagine the meeting where this was decided. A room full of serious men in suits, maps of wheat fields spread across the table, nodding solemnly as someone says, "Our greatest threat has wings." Sort of. There's probably a moment of silence for the fallen wheat before someone orders, "Mobilize the troops." And just like that, Operation Bird Hunt is on. Captain Meredith, a seasoned officer, is assigned to lead the mission. His men pack ammunition, supplies, and a confidence that will soon prove wildly misplaced. They roll out in trucks across the dry plains, expecting a few days of sport and an easy victory. After all, how hard could it be? These are just birds, big, dumb, flightless birds. Except they're not dumb. Emus are fast, faster than a truck on rough terrain, and they run in unpredictable patterns, splitting into groups like guerrilla fighters. Each bird can hit speeds of over 50 km/h, leap fences, and vanish into scrub before a human can even reload. The soldiers haven't fought an enemy like this before. In fact, no one has. As the first wave of emus approaches, the soldiers ready their weapons. The farmers watch, hopeful. The plan seems simple. Line up the birds in the open fire, restore agricultural order. But there's a problem. This isn't an open field. It's Australia. The land is uneven, the heat is brutal, and the birds. They just don't cooperate. When the soldiers finally pull the trigger, the guns rattle and smoke fills the air. But the emus keep running. Bullets spray into the horizon, hitting everything except the target. Within minutes, the enemy scatters into smaller mobs, vanishing behind ridges. The army scores a few kills, but the majority escape, unbothered, unbroken, and seemingly laughing in bird language. By the end of the day, the farmers are still staring at their ruined fields. The emus regroup for another raid. The soldiers wipe sweat from their brows and exchange looks that say, "This is not what we signed up for." And somewhere in Parliament, the genius who said, "Send the army," is probably congratulating himself on a job well done. You can't help but feel it. The absurdity, the tension, the creeping realization that this isn't a war Australia can actually win. The birds aren't just surviving, they're thriving. And the wheat, it's already lost. Next up, the official declaration. Because apparently, when you lose to birds once, the solution is to declare war properly this time. You stand in formation under the scorching Australian sun, sweat dripping down your back, listening to a briefing that sounds like the setup to a bad joke. Gentlemen, your mission is to engage and neutralize. The emu. The officer pauses, waiting for laughter. None comes. Because somehow this isn't satire, it's government policy. The order came straight from Canberra. The farmers of Western Australia were desperate, their crops overrun by emus that refused to migrate north after breeding season. The nation's wheat supply was at risk, and the local wildlife department had already tried and failed to handle the crisis. So the Minister of Defence approved a limited military intervention. In other words, the Australian Army was going to war with birds. It's November 1932. The troops consist of 3 men, 2 Lewis machine guns, and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. Captain G.P.W. Meredith, a veteran of the First World War, commands the operation. He's used to fighting enemies that shoot back, not ones that run in circles. But orders are orders, and the mission is clear. Assist the farmers and reduce the emu population. When the soldiers arrive in the district of Campion, morale is bizarrely high. The men joke about adding bird slayer to their resumes. The locals cheer. Finally, someone is taking their problem seriously. The press catches wind of the operation and immediately dubs it the Great Emu War. The name sticks because, honestly, it's too perfect. Then, reality sets in. The first engagement begins near a patch of farmland crawling with emus. From a distance, they look harmless, gangly, awkward, pecking at the soil. The soldiers load their Lewis guns, set up an ambush, and wait for the flock to approach. But emus don't follow scripts. As soon as the troops open fire, the birds scatter in every direction. Bullets rip through the air, kicking up dust, but the emus simply sprint, zigzagging like Olympic sprinters on espresso. A few fall, most don't. Within seconds, they vanish into the bush, leaving behind nothing but footprints and wounded pride. Captain Meredith watches through his binoculars, bewildered. The enemy has no chain of command, no central camp, no strategy, and yet they're winning by sheer chaos. The soldiers reload and try again, chasing a smaller group into the open. The gun jams. The birds keep running. One private swears he saw an emu glance back with contempt. By the second day, the operation already feels cursed. The terrain is rough, the weather brutal, and the trucks can't keep up with birds that move faster than mechanical transport on uneven ground. Each time the soldiers set up an ambush, the emus outmaneuver them. It's not a battle, it's slapstick. The local farmers, once grateful, now watch in disbelief as professional soldiers fail to outsmart creatures with brains the size of walnuts. The newspapers have a field day. Headlines like "Army loses ground to birds" and "Emus 1, human 0" start popping up. The press photographers tag along, capturing shots of grim-faced troops firing at blurs of feathers. Somewhere in London, the British Empire's reputation quietly weeps. Captain Meredith writes in his report that the emus display remarkable maneuverability and seem to have developed a sense of military strategy. He notes that the birds operate in small units led by a captain. It's unclear whether he's joking. By the end of the first week, over 2,500 rounds of ammunition have been spent. The confirmed emu casualties, maybe a dozen. The rest are alive, well, and probably telling stories to their chicks about the day they outran machine guns. Desperate for a win, the troops mount their guns on a truck to chase the birds directly. The plan sounds bold, until the truck hits uneven terrain and bounces so violently the gunner can't aim. The birds scatter again. The operation dissolves into farce. Soldiers firing wildly, emus sprinting effortlessly, and farmers wondering if they should have just built better fences. At one point, a large group of emus charges straight at the men, hundreds of them, necks bobbing like feathery battering rams. The soldiers open fire, and for a brief moment, it looks like a proper battle scene. Then the gun jams again. The emus break through and vanish into the scrub, leaving chaos and humiliation in their wake. When the dust settles, Captain Meredith calls a halt. His men are exhausted, the farmers unimpressed, and the birds unscathed. The operation has achieved nothing but ridicule. Yet somehow, it's not over. The government insists the mission continue. Because when humans lose to nature, the solution is obviously to try again harder. As the sun sets over the devastated fields, the soldiers sit by their campfire, silent. One lights a cigarette and mutters, "We fought in France for less humiliation." Somewhere in the darkness, the drumming call of the emus echoes, a low, mocking rhythm that sounds eerily like laughter. The next phase is coming. A second offensive, new tactics, more bullets, same enemy. And this time, the emus are ready. You've seen defeat before, but never one that involves feathers. The army regroups after the first humiliating encounter, determined to prove that Australia's finest can, in fact, defeat a bird. The newspapers are mocking, the farmers are skeptical, and the soldiers are tired of being outmaneuvered by what's essentially an overgrown chicken with anger issues. So the high command doubles down. Captain Meredith reorganizes his men, adjusts tactics, and prepares for what he calls a renewed offensive. Translation: same guns, same birds, same futility, just with more optimism. The troops mount the Lewis guns back onto trucks, reasoning that mobility will finally give them an edge. Spoiler, it won't. The Western Australian plains are a mechanic's nightmare. Uneven, full of holes, and rough enough to turn a smooth drive into a violent chiropractic session. The soldiers set out again. Dust clouds rise behind them as they spot another large group of emus grazing peacefully near a dam. Hundreds of them. The perfect target, the perfect chance at redemption. The gunners ready their weapons. The truck revs. The emus look up. For one glorious second, everyone holds their breath. Then, chaos. The truck lurches forward, bouncing wildly. The gunner tries to aim but gets tossed like a rag doll. Bullets spray into the dirt, hitting nothing but scenery. The emus, startled but uninjured, scatter in a flurry of dust and feathers. Some sprint straight ahead, others veer off in unpredictable directions. And one particularly bold bird stops mid-run, stares directly at the truck, and bolts away again, mocking them clearly. Within minutes, the battle is over. The Yender soldiers have emptied half their ammunition into the horizon. The truck's engine is overheating, the gun has jammed again, and the birds are long gone. Captain Meredith notes grimly that the emus display extraordinary evasive capabilities. That's military speak for "we missed everything." By now, the men are starting to crack. Some blame the terrain, others blame the guns. One swears the birds are deliberately taunting them, and honestly, it's hard to argue. The emus seem to know exactly when the soldiers reload, regroup, or even sneeze. They charge in tight flocks, then scatter at the first gunshot, splitting into smaller platoons that regroup miles away. If you didn't know better, you'd think they'd trained for this. Farmers, who once cheered the army's arrival, are now watching the fiasco unfold with thinly veiled disappointment. "At least the birds are getting exercise," one mutters. The newspapers, gleefully savage, report every detail. Military outgunned by emus, birds win again, no prisoners taken. The public eats it up. After all, nothing sells like national humiliation dressed as comedy. To make things worse, the government starts receiving letters from across the world, people laughing at the idea of an empire losing to wildlife. Even within the army, morale plummets. One soldier writes in his journal that it feels like fighting ghosts. Another compares it to shooting into a mirage made of feathers. Still, they press on. In a desperate attempt to salvage dignity, Captain Meredith tries nighttime operations. The plan? Catch the emus off guard while they rest. The result? Pitch-black chaos. The emus hear them coming miles away and vanish into the darkness. All the soldiers manage to shoot are shadows, and one unfortunate water tank. By mid-November, it's clear to everyone except the bureaucrats in Canberra that the war is unwinnable. The emus can't be herded, ambushed, or intimidated. They are, by all measurable standards, superior guerrilla tacticians. They move in small units, communicate through deep drumming calls, and seem to instinctively outmaneuver every human plan. They don't fight, but somehow they always win. The final straw comes when the soldiers encounter what appears to be the alpha emu. He's larger, faster, and far bolder than the rest. The troops fire an entire magazine trying to bring him down. He takes a few hits, stumbles, then bolts into the bush at full speed, never to be seen again. Legend has it he survived, becoming a sort of feathery war hero in emu folklore. After several weeks of failure, Captain Meredith finally reports back. Over 10,000 rounds of ammunition expended, confirmed kills fewer than 1,000, and morale somewhere between existential crisis and bird phobia. The campaign has cost the government money, ammunition, and credibility, and achieved nothing but national embarrassment. When Parliament finally orders a withdrawal, no one celebrates. The soldiers pack up their jammed guns, limp trucks, and shredded pride. The farmers return to their fields, where emus still strut like victorious generals, inspecting conquered land. Captain Meredith, to his credit, keeps his composure. He writes in his final report that if the army ever faced actual warfare against such an opponent, they would face formidable adversaries. It's half joke, half warning. You can almost picture it, a nation that once defeated German divisions, now forced to admit tactical inferiority to a bird. The headlines write themselves. The soldiers' faces say the rest. Australia hadn't just lost a war. It had accidentally invented the most ridiculous military defeat in modern history. And somewhere beyond the wheat fields, the emus march on, undefeated and deeply unbothered. You'd think a war would end with treaties, ceasefires, or at least a symbolic handshake. Not this one. The Great Emu War ends the way it began, badly, awkwardly, and covered in feathers. After weeks of humiliation, the Australian army withdraws from the Western Australian wheat belt. No trumpets, no victory march, just the sound of machine guns being packed up while emus continue to strut around like they own the place. because at this point, they do. Captain Meredith and his men, sunburnt, dust-caked and thoroughly demoralized, are ordered to stand down. Their official mission is over. The emus are, technically speaking, undefeated. The birds don't know this, of course, but you can't help feeling they'd be smug about it if they did. In fact, they seem more confident than ever, marching through the fields in broad daylight, eating, trampling, and occasionally staring down farmers as if to say, "Nice try, mate." The newspapers have a field day. Headlines across Australia read like parody. Emus win war. Birds rout army. Troops withdraw in disgrace. Wheat fields fall to flightless foe. Cartoonists depict soldiers running from a horde of giant birds, while politicians insist it was a valuable learning experience. The government, already unpopular due to the Depression, now looks ridiculous. The opposition mocks them in Parliament, asking whether the Defence Ministry plans to issue medals for bravery under poultry fire. Captain Meredith, to his credit, handles it with British stoicism. In his final report, he admits defeat, but praises the enemy's toughness and resilience. He even notes, half seriously, that if the Australian army had such stamina, it would be invincible. That line makes it into the papers too, because irony is the one resource Australia never runs out of. Meanwhile, out on the farms, there's no laughter, just ruin. The emus resume their feeding frenzy, unbothered by the human retreat. Wheat crops lie shredded, fences broken, and livelihoods destroyed. The farmers feel abandoned, their pleas ignored. The government's great military experiment has achieved precisely nothing, except perhaps boosting the morale of emus everywhere. But politicians, unwilling to admit total failure, scramble for a new narrative. They frame the withdrawal not as defeat, but as a temporary tactical pause. The public doesn't buy it. When a nation loses to birds, it doesn't matter what you call it. The punchlines write themselves. The army's retreat turns into legend almost overnight. Radio comedians turn the campaign into sketches. In pubs, people reenact the Battle of Campion, pretending to fire imaginary machine guns at passing pigeons. Even foreign correspondents pick up the story. One British journalist writes that the Empire's finest have met their match, in creatures too stupid to fly, but too clever to die. Yet beneath the humor, there's genuine embarrassment. Australia, a country proud of its rugged image and military valor, has become the butt of a global joke. The soldiers are reassigned, quietly, to less feathery duties. Captain Meredith fades from the headlines, his reputation intact but tinged with absurdity. Somewhere deep in the Defence Ministry archives, a file labeled Operation Emu is quietly buried under more respectable failures. The government eventually passes the problem back to the farmers, who are told to handle it themselves. Some set up bounties, others build taller fences. Ironically, civilian hunters armed with rifles end up killing more emus in a few months than the army managed in their entire campaign. It's almost poetic, ordinary people succeeding where the military couldn't. But by then, the damage is done. For decades afterward, the Great Emu War remains a national wound disguised as a national joke. Textbooks don't dwell on it, but it lives on in whispers, jokes, and bar conversations. Every Australian knows the story. The time their government declared war on birds and lost. And the emus, they thrive. Their population remains strong, their legend even stronger. Farmers still curse them, but deep down, there's a reluctant respect. The emus didn't win through force or intellect. They won by being stubborn, fast, and too weird to predict. Imagine being one of those soldiers, years later, telling your grandchildren about your military service, Gallipoli, the Western Front, and the Emu War. you'd skip that last part. Or maybe you'd laugh and say, "We fought bravely, son, but they had the high ground and better legs." Some defeats are tragic, others are absurd. The Great Emu War manages to be both, a perfect storm of overconfidence, bureaucracy, and the unrelenting comedy of nature refusing to cooperate. The army may have retreated, but the story endures as Australia's most ridiculous military episode, a reminder that even empires have their farcical moments. And somewhere in the wheat fields, under the relentless sun, the victors continue their eternal victory parade, eating, running, and occasionally pausing to stare out across their conquered territory, as if daring the humans to try again. Decades later, Australia has fought in global conflicts, built cities, and sent satellites into orbit. But the emus still own one uncontested victory. The Great Emu War of 1932 has become something greater than a military embarrassment. It's a national myth, a cultural in-joke, and perhaps the purest symbol of human arrogance ever recorded. When the story resurfaces, as it always does, Australians don't deny it. They laugh, wince, and raise a glass to the birds that outran bullets. In the beginning, the tale circulated quietly, a bit of local folklore whispered among farmers and soldiers. But as time passed and national humor evolved, the absurdity of it proved irresistible. Newspapers started revisiting the incident, with tongue firmly in cheek. Comedians worked it into their routines. Historians, with mixed emotions, called it a case study in the limitations of mechanized warfare against the natural world. By the late 20th century, it was more than history. It was meme material. In the internet age, the Great Emu War found new life. Forums and social media posts resurrected the saga with headlines like "Australia's Greatest Military Defeat," featuring birds, and "When Darwin Won a Gunfight." Reddit threads debated military strategy. Could modern tanks beat the emus? Spoiler, the consensus was no. But the humor hides something deeper. The Emu War endures not just because it's funny, it endures because it's true. It's a reminder of how spectacularly human plans collapse when nature decides not to cooperate. The Australian army didn't lose because it was weak. It lost because it assumed control where it had none. The emus weren't villains. They were simply being emus, migrating, eating, surviving. Humanity brought guns. Nature brought indifference. Modern Australians, far from being ashamed, have turned the defeat into a national badge of self-awareness. Statues, murals, and even local festivals commemorate the battle. In Perth, pubs serve craft beers with names like Emu Victory Ale. There's an Emu War video game, a folk song, and at least 3 separate comedy sketches on national television reenacting the fiasco. Some towns even stage mock re-enlistments, complete with cardboard machine guns and people dressed in bird costumes sprinting through fields while spectators cheer for the birds. It's become a form of national therapy. Australia, a country built on harsh landscapes and tough survival, embraces its failures as proudly as its triumphs. Losing to emus isn't a stain on national honor. It's proof of the absurd resilience that defines the Australian spirit. When the world points and laughs, Australians laugh louder. But underneath the laughter, there's a quiet environmental lesson. The Emu War marked one of the earliest public reminders that wildlife management can't be solved with firepower. After the debacle, government policy shifted. Instead of sending soldiers, officials funded fencing programs and bounties for farmers. Over time, they developed more ecological methods of coexistence, because it turns out, ecosystems don't respond well to machine gun diplomacy. Even scientists cite the episode as an example of anthropocentric failure, the idea that humans often assume dominance without understanding the systems they're tampering with. It's not just a funny story. It's ecological irony in pure form. The birds won not through cunning or strength, but through perfect adaptation to their environment. They didn't outthink the army. They simply were the land, and the land, as always, won. In popular culture, the Emu War has taken on mythic qualities. You can find it referenced in songs, history podcasts, and even international news outlets baffled by the whole affair. American and British audiences react with disbelief. Wait, Australia actually lost a war to birds? To which Australians typically respond, yes, and we'd lose again. There's something universally appealing about that answer, a kind of proud, irreverent honesty that says, we know it's ridiculous, but it's ours. In that sense, the Emu War isn't just a punchline, it's cultural alchemy. Australia took humiliation and turned it into heritage. And maybe that's the ultimate message. The Great Emu War isn't about defeat, it's about perspective. Humanity's endless attempts to control the uncontrollable, to impose order on chaos, to make nature obey. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, all you can do is laugh, learn, and move on. Today, emus roam freely across the outback, utterly indifferent to their historical significance. They don't know they're symbols of national irony. They just keep running, unstoppable, unbothered, perfectly evolved for the land that defeated every attempt to tame it. So the next time someone boasts about human progress, about dominion, conquest, and mastery over nature, remember Australia's finest military minds versus a bird with no wings and no plan. History's verdict was simple. The birds didn't need to fight back. They just needed to run faster than our bullets. And that, perhaps, is the most Australian ending possible. A comedy that became a cautionary tale, a farce turned philosophy. The Great Emu War stands eternal proof that the universe, when given the chance, always sides with the absurd.